People of African American descent have been part of America's story since the earliest days of the Republic. Yet only in recent years have the contributions of African Americans begun to receive the attention and the esteem they are due. Dominion Energy and the Library of Virginia honored distinguished Virginians, past and present, as strong men and women in Virginia history. It's a way to recognize their important contributions to the state, the nation, or their professions. They are extraordinary African Americans whose perseverance through challenging times has forged paths for others. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Sheila Bowen Taylor, a nuclear engineer and mentor. She is one of our 2023 honorees. In 1981, Taylor became the second woman and first African American woman to be hired as a nuclear engineer at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. Thank you for joining me, Sheila.
Thank you, Peggy.
So when I think of the shipyard, I think of big ships and submarines. Growing up in Chesapeake, nearby the shipyard, did you always dream of working there?
No, as a matter of fact, my first ambition was to be a school teacher. And that became my eye-opening experience when I did a summer internship at Suffolk Public Schools, and convinced me I really didn't want to be into teaching. So the line of work I finally went into was a much better fit.
And how did your path go? How did you wind up working at the shipyard?
Well, originally, when I finished my undergraduate degree at Norfolk State, I had employment at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company at that time. And I think right now it's called Huntington Ingalls is the name of it now. But back in the early 70s, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Early 70s, I went to work at Newport Shipbuilding as a structural engineer. And that's basically having a minor in math and a degree in physics. It was the correct pathway to become a structural engineer at that time.
When you were first hired at the shipyard, did you know you were only the second woman and the first Black woman to be hired as a nuclear engineer? What was that like?
No, well, basically, when I was hired in 1981 as a nuclear engineer at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, I wasn't aware that I was going to be the second female or the first Black female. So it wasn't until, I guess, maybe the first week of employment, you walk around and you don't see many people with hard hats to say nuclear engineer. And so, but yeah, it wasn't one of those things that was, I guess, necessarily advertised or, recognized. But yeah, that's how that happened.
So you worked in the planning department on submarines and surface ships and aircraft carriers. So what exactly does that mean, the planning department? Make it simple for those simple folk like me.
Okay, so when I first was hired, our official title was nuclear engineering. And I guess maybe 5 or 10 years into the transition, it became nuclear engineering and planning department, because at that time they incorporated planners who happened to do the estimation on how long it would take to do a repair or necessarily a refueling. So when the main function of nuclear engineering has to do with all the ships that we work on were nuclear ships. Mm-hmm. And because of that fact, there were certain qualifications and certain clearances you had to have and be, recertified every couple of years. So basically, we had nuclear engineers, we had electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. So engineering covers a wide range of engineering disciplines. But when I do say about ships, since that's the primary function of our shipyard, is to provide as quickly and as safely as possible service to our fleet. That's the main objective, and to do it safely.
You've probably been on a number of big ships and submarines. What's that like? I think that would be pretty cool.
It is. And I always would say this, my least favorite ship to go on was a carrier, aircraft carrier, because it's big. It's like a couple of football fields long.
Right.
And although you need to always find the nuclear plant or the nuclear systems, I would get lost. So what I would always go with a mechanic who, especially a piping mechanic, or I would go with our RAD, we would call RAD engineers or radiological engineers, as far as knowing exactly where the reactor compartment was and then all the piping that we need to inspect. But it basically so submarines, you really can't get lost on a submarine. It's just one long corridor passageway down the center of the ship. And of course, it's easier to find a
Right.
reactor compartment versus a carrier.
Gotcha. Wow. Interesting stuff. Hey, so tell me about your education. You've got a physics degree from Norfolk State and a master's degree in organizational leadership and administration at Central Michigan. And you said you also have a minor in math. How did all that
Yes.
education prepare you for your work?
Well, I'm going to backtrack and say I was blessed to be raised in an era where we had caring teachers and they all looked like me. So it was fairly easy to get exposed to the math teachers because they looked like me, the science teachers, they looked like me, and they were always very encouraging. So it was one of those types of backgrounds that I was blessed that segregation had its plus, but when I was about to graduate, like my senior year, we had the opportunity to transfer to an integrated school. A lot of us chose to stay at our all Black high school. And I think that was a wise choice because of the strong bond and the nurturing atmosphere that we had. I'm not saying that currently that's not happening, but I can only tell what happened in my past and the way I felt because I saw people who looked like me who were educated, and it didn't seem to be a problem for them as far as teaching our subjects. It's the same math, it's the same science. So you just have to apply yourself.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. You're described as the brains of the family, right? You're described as the brains of the family by your equally successful sister, Sharon Bowen, chair of the New York Stock Exchange. Are
Correct.
you two just exceptionally gifted, or what was the motivating factor that caused you guys to both reach these high levels?
Well, Sharon always says that. I think she says that only because I took a whole lot more math and science than she did. She is a very capable person, highly qualified, but I think our upbringing had a lot to do with it. Family was always very encouraging, especially my mother. My mother always instilled the hope and the possibility that we could do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was just learning. It was just a matter of getting the right books and to study and to do your very best. And so I think that had a lot to do with it. I'm the middle child. I was the middle sibling, and I had older brother and sister, and of course my younger brother and sister. All of us did attend college. A few of my siblings didn't graduate, but we all were afforded the opportunity to go to college. And we went in different directions. I do talk about, I'm thinking basically since my father worked at the shipyard, we knew what it basically entailed as far as what he was doing, as he was more manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
But we had many people in our neighborhood who also worked in the shipyard. So it was one of those kind of environments that, as long as your expectations are that in order to succeed, and we knew education was the building block, regardless whether or not it was a vocational education or an academic education, you needed to be trained in something. And I think that had a lot to do with, I call our success. My sister and I would argue about who's smarter, but she knows more about economics than I ever will. and I wouldn't trade my profession for hers at all. But I do admire and I do understand all of the hardships that a lot of us had to face. And currently we still are facing, but you always want to instill hope because that's the future. You always want to instill that hope that it can happen.
And you mentioned that too, that you always believed you could do anything. You were taught you could do anything. And you also mentioned representation, the fact that you saw teachers who looked like you.
Correct.
Segregation time frame, but it's important in today's time frame that people see people and you speak a lot about representation and young people being able to see themselves as
Sure.
successful roles. You felt that growing up. And were these who were the other inspiring people in your lives? You mentioned the teachers. Do you remember other people that you saw in yourself and thought, I could
Well,
do that?
well, basically, our neighborhood was always encouraging. Like I said, we had a mixture of teachers, preachers, we had an auto mechanic, we had business owners who owned like the local grocery store, the little mom and pop shop. We had neighbors who ran bus services for, back in the day, we didn't have a lot of public transportation, but we did have one neighbor who had his own bus service, and a lot of shipyard workers went, caught his bus. And back in the day, I can remember we didn't have a lot, but we never considered ourselves poor. It was one of those kind of neighborhoods where everybody was always doing their best. We had a little garden. So basically, when I think about those who had an imprint on me, it starts with family, expands to community, then it goes to my church, my college, my high school, my college years, and then
Yeah.
eventually having other mentors as I did my career.
And you were talking about, the 1960s. Did you have the sense and the feeling of the changes going on and that, segregation would soon be over? I mean, were you thinking about those things or, I mean, what was going on in your mind? Do you
Yeah,
remember back then?
yeah. Basically, and I tell the story when my older sister went to school, she would cry every day.
Mm.
So somebody had the great idea about sending Sheila to school with her to keep her quiet because my older brother was getting tired of leaving class just to sit with her to be quiet. She was in like first grade or kindergarten. So I went to school with her for maybe a semester. And at that time, I'm listening to what the teacher's teaching them and I'm picking up on it. And eventually my sister did settle down and, my brother didn't have to be there and I really didn't have to be there either. But, my mother made the choice of instead of me going to school 2 years earlier, she said, no, that one semester with my sister was enough. But I think that might have been the beginning of me being exposed to what education was all about. My mother always did a great job as far as making sure we had the reading materials. And, if we went to the library, because back in the day, we would have to catch a bus
Mm.
to get to, Chesapeake wasn't Chesapeake. Chesapeake was Norfolk County. And so we would take a bus to Portsmouth. But I think those early formative years made a big difference as far as understanding the value of being committed and to do your very best.
What does it mean to be recognized as a strong men and women honoree?
Let me tell you, that was such an honor. It was unexpected. I had no idea that I was under anybody's radar. So when I first got approached, I kept thinking, you sure? Because I don't, I didn't know about the organization per se. I did hear of a few folks who had, like Louise Lucas. I'd heard she had gotten honored, and Bob Dandridge, who had gotten honored, because we know them both. But for me, it was just a validation that my career and my journey was of value. Lots of times you don't know who's watching you. And when you do your very best and present the very best that you can do, it was a very great a great feeling. I was very appreciative, humble, honored. I can't think of enough adjectives to say, but I was extremely blessed and honored to be one of the honorees for this particular year.
Well, it's well deserved. Dominion Energy and the Library of Virginia sponsor this event to recognize the history of African American change makers in Virginia's history. What would you say is the most important thing for people who maybe don't know about it to know?
Well, one of the things I want folks to understand is it's a very extreme honor to be chosen. Dominion Energy does a great job, and I've been doing my little background check on what you guys have done. But I was really impressed that I was able to bless or nominate a nonprofit to get a grant. It just makes a big difference when you can find an organization between Dominion Energy and the Library of Virginia to document some of the struggles and the triumphs that a lot of African Americans have made. Not only women, but men, not only men, but women too. It seems as if men get recognized real quickly, but women don't. But it's just great that we have that particular program that can do highlights of different backgrounds. Because if you look at the honorees that were awarded that are award this year, we all come from diverse backgrounds, very diverse. But it's just a cross section of what the great state of Virginia produces. So I am blessed, I am honored, and from now on, I will be number one cheerleader for the program.
What advice would you give for young women, especially women of color, looking to get into the STEM field?
Okay, I know we want to narrow it down to women, but this advice is going to be across the board, women,
Good.
men, okay, and not only people of color, but any person. But since the minorities, people of color, are underrepresented, it's important that we get exposed and understand that we have careers in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. So all of those areas are wide open as far as needing people to fill those positions. And my advice is take as much math and science as you can when you can. Now, I was blessed when I was in high school. At that time, we didn't really have AP, whatever. We had advanced placements, but it wasn't the kind that transferred into college credits. But I was blessed that I took all the math, all the science that my high school provided. So when I went to go to college, and I was blessed to also work in the Office of Administrative Affairs, Academic Affairs. So it prepared me for being exposed very early to the kind of math and science that you definitely need, regardless whether you go into engineering or not. A lot of those careers translate and you can have like a dual career. Like I said, I was a structural engineer for a while. I became a nuclear engineer and retired as a nuclear engineer. So the disciplines are there. It's just that we have to encourage, mentor, and be the wind beneath the wings of the young folks as they look for the future. Because I'm retired. I'm lucky I'm retired. And I think about my little grandbaby and I say, you know what? You are the future. You have to be my replacement. So I'm pretty certain there are other young people out there who are going to be replacing a lot of us.
Sheila Bowen Taylor, congratulations on your long, distinguished career and on being named a Strong Men and Women honoree in 2023. Thank you for your service, your work, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. And I will always be grateful and blessed for this particular honor. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheila Bowen Taylor. I'm a retired nuclear engineer with more than 37 years worth of nuclear experience. My journey began in Chesapeake, Virginia. I'm a middle child of 5 siblings. My father was an electrician at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, and eventually my brother and I both got employment at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. I did not realize I was going to be like the second female nuclear engineer until I got there. Did not realize at that time I was the first Black woman nuclear engineer, until I got there. But it was a good career. Yes, I'm not going to say everything was a bed of roses, because of course women tend to always get put in a box that you're the secretary or you're something other than what you are. So on a couple of occasions I did have people come up and ask me, and assumed I was the secretary. Well, may I speak to blah, blah, blah? And I said, well, the secretary is right over there. You can talk to the secretary. So I had to do that a couple of times. But it didn't mean that I felt discriminated against. It's just that it was a perception. And that's one thing about life. You have to prove people wrong all the time, because they don't know your backstory. They don't know whether or not you got 1 degree, 10 degrees, or whatever. So you always assume that maybe they just don't understand. And, just the approach is, even as a young person, don't get upset that they think you're the secretary. You just correct them and you go on and do what you have to do. As I've gotten older, I just would like the younger generation to understand that education is a solution. And it doesn't really matter exactly. Everybody may not be able to get a degree, but at least get a vocation. I also would like to take the time to thank those individuals who have been in my life for my whole journey. I am extremely grateful for my family, my classmates, my friends, and especially my daughter, who has been my rock in addition to other people. Finally, I would like to thank the Library of Virginia and Dominion Energy for this important recognition that was bestowed on me. I am very grateful.